Hey guys, Chris Peach here, and welcome to the Money Peach podcast. Hey, do you remember growing up learning how to handle money? Yeah, neither do I. So that's why we're here today, to make your money fun again. You know, we're going to talk about the principles in life that actually matter when it comes to managing your money in a way that works. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Money Peach podcast. Before we jump into another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast, I want to take a second to talk to you guys about my free budgeting form. You know, the first step to getting on any financial plan is to measure the money. And the only way to measure the money is if you are living on a monthly budget. So after this episode, head on over to moneypeach.com and please download my free budgeting form. There's thousands of people now all over the world who are taking back control of their money using this same form each and every month. The number one habit of highly successful people is they're proactive. So be proactive with your money and get yourself on a budget. And just like that, we are back with another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. This is episode 39. On the show today, my guest is a debt-free millionaire, meaning he doesn't even have a mortgage. He's completely debt-free, net worth of $1 million. What also makes this guest special is he's also a fellow podcaster. I picked up on Scott's podcast a little over a year ago. It's called The Scott Alan Turner Show. He's also known as the Financial Rockstar. So you got to check it out. He's an amazing podcast, but I remember listening to his show thinking, someday I'm going to have Scott Alan Turner as a guest on the Money Peach podcast. And that day is today. So without further ado, let me bring on my good friend, Scott Alan Turner. Alrighty, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show. Super excited to have you here. A little background with Scott is I started listening to his podcast, which we're going to talk about, well before I had my own podcast because I thought it was one of the better ones I've heard in a long time, and I just got hooked. And so we're going to start talking to Scott, and you're going to understand why I got hooked to his podcast. But I always thought, wonder what it would be like to have Scott Alan Turner on my podcast. And now we're here. So Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, Chris. Glad to be here. I think it was the cats. I was talking about the cats that lures everybody in, except for the dog lovers.
Yes, you do talk about the cat. So let's talk about, okay, we're going to go back at the end of the show. I want to talk about your podcast even more, but just real quick, what is the deal? In the beginning and the end of your episode, you always talk about, you know, you got your producer, Toby, you got your wife on there, and then you got these cats. So let's talk about that.
Sure. I've got the studio cats. Sometimes they make an appearance. Occasionally you can hear them in the background. They may walk into the office or out of the office and they make the little announcement, hey, I'm here. And then, usually goes downhill from there.
Okay. So the name of your podcast is The Financial Rockstar.
Yes.
Why are you a financial rockstar? How did that tie in with Rockstar, Financial Rockstar, all of that?
The tie-in was I have a great joy and love of personal finance, sharing that message with people. I also play in a band. I'm a rock and roller, kind of a metalhead, and that was kind of my branding early on. I wanted to tie money and music together, to my favorite things in life.
Okay, so speaking of music, then who do you listen to? What's your favorite band of all time?
All time is the old Metallica music. They're actually coming to tour next month, so I'm super excited. I got awesome seats for that show, and I've seen them a couple times, and they're legit. They're cool.
So does the band you play with now, does that mimic a lot of Metallica or similar type style?
We play a variety of tunes, but yeah, we do incorporate Metallica songs every so often. We played one of their newer songs at a show a couple months ago, and we played out about a week and a half ago. We played Ride the Lightning, which is one of their older tunes.
Very cool. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, I've always wanted to know that, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to save this question and ask him on the show so I can go back and listen to it myself. So, all right, now I want to talk about you because you are impressive. I've been listening to your show for a while, and then before we started recording, I asked you a few questions and was even more impressed, and I think you have a ton of value to provide people who are listening out there, and so I wanted to start off with money. I mean, this is obviously a show about money, but
sure.
One of the things that I think really separated you was how relatable you are. Okay. So let's talk about just starting off, Scott Alan Turner. Where did you learn, younger years about money, or what did you not learn? Where did you kind of get your money blueprint?
I started the same place in most people, what they did in their lives, just making the mistakes that you make. Having student loan debt, having credit card debt, too much car, too much house. When I got out of college, I didn't have the financial background. They don't teach that stuff in school. And you know that too. You get out and you start buying stuff. We live in a consumer-oriented society. The exact same thing. And you rack up a bunch of debt. And at some point, hopefully early on, for some people it's later, you get that financial rude awakening like, oh, I got way too much debt. And maybe this is not how life is supposed to be lived. And you take tips from other people and start correcting that. So
starting off even before you went into your money mess, and we'll talk about that in a second, growing up, did you learn from your parents about money, or where did that all start with you? Because I think we all have a money blueprint that we've developed from more is caught than taught. I know that I learned a lot of the good and the bad decisions with money from just watching my parents, and I'm trying to be intentional not to make those same mistakes for my kids. So what did you learn growing up about money?
Unfortunately, very, very little. And it wasn't through the fault of my parents. I had great parents, but my dad worked for the town. He had a pension, and that was his retirement savings. My mom worked part-time at a coffee shop. They never owned a home, so I lived in apartments my entire life growing up. Didn't know about mortgages or anything like that. They always bought used cars, so they never had, and my dad had a town truck that he drove, so he didn't really have to have a vehicle. So they never had car loans, never had credit cards. And so we didn't learn about any of that stuff because they didn't have to deal with it in their day-to-day lives. What they did enforce in me, not because I liked it, they said, save. Save 50% of what you make. And they kind of got me going in that mode to help save for college. I've been working since I was 10. So I had a lot of opportunity to earn money over the years and save.
So 50% of your income, that's what your parents told you to do?
Yeah, they encouraged me to save, and I really wanted to spend it all on candy and bicycles and skateboards, and sometimes I did. So it wasn't the smartest thing to do.
So did your parents live that way as well? Were they saving up to 50% of their income, or what do you remember?
I don't remember them ever having a whole lot of savings. They never had debt, and I never knew what they had in their bank accounts, but my dad had a stable job. He had the pension when he retired from the town. Mom worked part-time. So they didn't have mass quantities of savings. Even now, my mom, she's still alive, she relies on Social Security. That's her sole source of income. But they also lived very, very simple lives. We didn't travel a whole lot. They didn't have fancy clothes. It was a very lower middle-class town, small town where we grew up. And materialism and consumerism was just not a part of our family or even our surroundings and friends and society where we were.
So just thinking about what you just said, it sounds like mom and dad were pretty smart with their money. I mean, to stay completely out of debt and not go down that road, I mean, that's impressive. You don't hear that very often. I know that I kind of grew up in a complete opposite situation where, I was taught at a young age that borrowing money was a way of life. You'll always have a car payment. You're always going to have a credit card. You're always going to have a balance. That was my blueprint when I started off. And it sounds like you were completely the opposite.
Yeah, there was never any debt, but it was also a really, really simple lifestyle. I guess if you label it something, you call it frugality or minimalism is what they were living, not intentionally. I think that's just how they grew up and learned it from their parents.
Okay, so the reason why I'm asking you all these questions now, because I think it's very interesting, because you kind of went down a different road then. So you grew up in this lifestyle, minimalist or frugal, and you then transform into, I'm going to use your words here, I'm not picking on you, money moron.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to spend. I remember very clearly in my bedroom one time, I had a checking book. I would write things down, and I had made some goals of things I wanted to spend, these awesome amplifiers that I wanted to put in my car and the dollar amounts. And my dad came in here and started flipping through my checkbook. He's like, hey, what's this? And it's like, oh, that's like a really lot of money I want to spend on car stereo equipment. And he's like, wow, you really need to save that for school. So as soon as I graduated college, like I'm buying this stereo and I'm buying this and I'm buying that. And it was all downhill from there.
Okay. So as a money moron, and I'm a former money moron too, so I completely understand. I mean, what are some of the things that you did, you look back on and you're thinking, what the heck was I thinking?
Certainly the first new vehicle I purchased, I think a lot of people go with that. All right, I'm out of college. I've started working. Oh, I deserve a new car. So I showed up on the Jeep lot. Oh, that was the Chrysler lot one day. Bought a new Jeep, not knowing anything about interest or insurance or car payments. It was the same question we all fall for. What can you afford? And I bought as much this vehicle as I thought I could afford without having really much idea of my finances.
Were you basing it on not how much the Jeep cost, but how much down, how much a month?
Oh, absolutely. It was like a dollar amount down, which I don't exactly recall what it was. And I remember it was $260 a month. I remember that pretty clearly.
Okay, so you're right out of college, you get your Jeep, and then what's the next money moron mistake you make?
That was loading it up with the big stereo and the alarm system.
Okay.
And from there, I worked on paying down my student loans. I didn't like the interest that I was applying to student loans after those got started. About the same time, 9 months after school. All right, you got to start paying back your student loans. The principal payments start going in. I'm writing these checks and getting them back each month with the receipts and the dollar amounts not going down. That was kind of upsetting. To me, it was just a waste of money. So I started throwing a lot of money at that. A couple years later, couple raises, starting doing better at my job. Then the bank said, you can buy as much house as, we're going to let you. And I kind of went down that road, buying too much house. That was another financial pitfall I fell into as well.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic how when you go, well, not so much anymore, but years ago when you go to buy a house, I know when Andrea and I went and first bought our house, we were going on stated income. Basically, it was like, hey, how much do you think you make? And we just kind of throw out a number and they're like, good enough for us. And we were doing these 80-20 loans with a crazy arm, and we had no idea what we were getting into. That helped us get to our rock bottom. Did you find yourself kind of doing the same dumb things as far as mortgage is concerned?
Oh, absolutely. Even my boss, when I was considering buying a house, he said, you should buy as much house as the bank will let you because it'll go up in value. And I believe that because I didn't know any better at the time. I didn't buy quite that much, but I was pretty darn close to it and drained my bank account, had a big car payment at the time and no savings, and then went out and bought a bunch of furniture on a credit as well. It was a bad situation, just mentally. It didn't spiral downward to where I was in foreclosure or bankruptcy, anything like that, but a lot of bills, not much money in the savings account.
So what was your aha moment?
It happened when I lived in Atlanta at the time. I was driving to work. I commuted 40 minutes each way each day. And on the billboard, I see the sign for a radio show by a guy named Clark Howard. He's based out of Atlanta. He's been on the radio as a consumer advocate for probably close to 30 years. I tuned into his radio station, and that was the aha moment, listening to this guy talking about having an emergency fund. Never even heard of an emergency fund at that point. Shopping around for your car insurance. Didn't know anything about that. Private mortgage insurance, how you shouldn't have that. Save 20% for your house as a down payment. I did not do that. All these different things, they started registering with me at about the same time. That was the wake-up moment, is hearing him on the radio and listening to him for 3 hours a day, every day.
So I'm also a huge fan of Clark Howard. I would say Clark Howard, Dave Ramsey, I feel like they're kind of the same, a lot of the same principles, and I learned a ton from them as well. But here in Phoenix, Arizona, we didn't have Clark Howard. We had a billboard with Dave Ramsey, and it was like what you said kind of just rang with me because it was the exact same moment, turning on the radio, and it was just a different guy with same message. So what were some of the first things you started doing when you realized, okay, my plan sucks. There has to be a better way out there. What was some of the first things you started doing?
Yeah, step one was extreme. I had moved into my house, drained my savings, had zero emergency fund, and I was single, so it was just me and my income. I immediately turned around. I think it was about a month after I got in my house, I put my car up for sale.
How long did you have the car when you went to go put it up for sale?
I had it for a year. I bought it slightly used. It had a few miles on it. Took a massive, massive depreciation hit. It was terrible and painful. But I got rid of the car note and paid cash for my $6,500 30,000 mile truck at the same time, and had a little bit left over to start an emergency fund.
Tell me about your emergency fund. What kind of emergency fund did you start with?
I started with zero, of course.
Yeah, of course. That's an emergency in itself.
Yep. I worked up to 6 months from there. I just started throwing at that point, I didn't have a car payment. So I would throw every spare dollar I had into that emergency fund, built it over 6 months. And once I had that fully funded, I started throwing more money towards my retirement, as also more money towards my mortgage, because I think I either put 5 or 10% down. So I had PMI, and I was anxious to get rid of that.
Okay, so backing up a little bit, your emergency fund you talked about, you said 6 months. So you and I mean, we could talk all day long and use terms, but I think sometimes we skip parts of it and it can be confusing. So I want to go back and make sure we nailed this down as 6 months of what?
6 months of fixed and variable expenses. The worst case scenario, in my case, single. So if I became unemployed, I had no income. Well, I wouldn't have to worry about funding my retirement because that's minor now. Probably would not go out to eat as much or travel. And there's not going to be any taxes to pay. So my fixed expenses are mortgage, food, insurance, and then food would fall under the variable expenses. Whatever that is per month that you spend on, which means you're going to have it some type of spending plan or budget in order to be able to track that information. And then you just multiply that out times 6. That's how much you need in liquid assets, preferably a savings account where it's not generating any interest, as a cushion and to cover the worst case scenario.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned in a savings account not generating any interest. The way I've always been taught is my emergency fund is going to cost me money. And the reason why is I could be taking that 6 months of expenses, bare minimum expenses, and I could be throwing it into an investment, earning interest over time. And I'm not doing that because I'm using it as basically insurance. It's like it's my short-term insurance, I need it now money. So you pay for that liquidity, meaning you pay for that access immediately. And
exactly. Yeah. And it'll cost you money because right now it doesn't even keep pace with inflation. And there's some bad ways that people do it as well. Some people say, well, I'm going to use my home equity line of credit. I've heard that from people as well. Well, that works great until the bank revokes that during bad times, which happened a lot in 2008, 2009. So your backup source goes away. Or let's say I'm going to use my credit card for emergency fund. Well, same deal. Your credit limit can go from $20,000 to $5,000 if the credit card company says it's going to be $5,000 now.
And not to mention the worst time to go further into debt is during an emergency. Just my opinion.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So now you're starting to clean your life up. You're starting to clean up this mess. What's the craziest thing you can think of that you did to clean your financial mess up?
Certainly selling the car was pretty extreme and taking that big depreciation hit. And then I probably sold a lot of stuff because I was in my house by myself and just selling unnecessary stuff that had accumulated. I had artwork. I mean, I had a dining room table, which didn't even make sense. Seating 6 people for one guy. I used it twice the entire time I was in my house. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Note to single people, you do not need a dining room table that sits 6 people.
No, it's cheaper just to go out to eat the twice a year that you'd use it.
Very cool. So you're dumping your debt. When did you get married then? Because I know you're married now. I obviously listened to your show. Katie's on the show. So let's talk about this because I want to talk about where you're at right now too, which is, I think, huge. But so what happened in that transition when you got married? When did that all come about?
Yeah, I've been married now for 11 years. I entered the marriage with just my mortgage. My wife entered in with double mortgage, first and second, and a car loan as well on top of that. So we combined all our finances. Started working with a financial planner, and then we decided, all right, I had a little bit of equity from the sale of my home after moving in with her. We paid off her second mortgage because that was carrying, I think, an 8% interest rate, something really high. And then the second move was, all right, you've got, I want to say $24,000 in a car loan. Let's go get rid of that and get what we have now, the Honda Fit, which is awesome. Paid off her car loan and bought a brand new car at the exact same time in cash.
So then did that make you debt free?
Other than her mortgage, that we were completely debt free at that point.
Okay. And so why did you guys combine your finances? I have to say I completely agree with that. But the more and more people I meet with, I realize this is not the norm. It's not the norm at all. I mean, it seems like it's at least 50-50, maybe even leaning more towards 60-40 that people don't combine their finances. So you said you combined your finances. Why?
To me, it was never even a discussion point of whether we were going to keep them or separate or not. We were follower of God. So we're like, all right, we're 2, we're becoming 1. We're going to combine all of our money. It's not my money and your money. It's our money together. We're going to make all these decisions together. We're going to do our budget together. We're going to do our long-term goal setting together. If we decide we want to go out and buy a new car or a move or get a house or something, we're going to do that together as a family. So it was just, we're no longer 2 individual people. We're one person working together as a team.
I like how you said it's not your money or my money, it's our money. But I think that also translates to it's not your debt or her debt or my debt. This is our debt. So I know when we got married, my wife had a student loan and I didn't have one. And so when I got married, I married a student loan. I mean, I became part owner of a student loan. And I think it's important for people to realize that, when you get married, it's one, right? You share a bed, you share kids, you should share a bank account. That's just, again, my opinion, but I feel like I'm an expert on my opinion.
And I agree with that. And what people need to realize is sometimes when you keep finances separate, money is the number one cause of issues in couples' lives. It's the number one cause of divorce. If you're a man and you're the sole income earner and your attitude is, I'm making all this money, I'm going to have X number of dollars a month for my allowance that I can go play out golf and buy a new car. And wife, you're going to have like half that or a quarter of that. Man, you want to make somebody madder than a hornet, you try that. But you give equal shares to each of you. Watch how your marriage flourishes at that point.
Amen. No, I cannot agree with that more. I mean, you're exactly right. I can't tell you how many times I've, counseled a couple or sat down with a couple and we're just talking about money. And it comes out that, she gets half of what I get because I go to work every day. And I'm like, no. She goes to work every day. She has 3 screaming kids.
Yes.
I promise you that's more work. So let's talk about money mistakes. I mean, we've talked about this up before we got on the show, but I want to talk to you about what you think some of the biggest money mistakes people are making and how they can correct it. So I'm going to hit you with, what's the biggest mistake people make with saving money?
Probably number one with saving money is just not saving enough. And you can call that paying yourself first or coming up with a budgeting plan, but carving out a percentage of your income, set aside every month, never touch it. Leave that for retirement. And if it's $1 out of every 100 or 1 penny out of every 100, $1, then that's what you start with. And as you get raises or bonuses or tax returns, you combine incomes, you move, and your income generates, you increase that as you can over time.
Do you and your wife do a budget?
We do. We've been budgeting. I didn't do as much budgeting when I was single, but I tracked all my spending through a tool. And then when we got married, we got on a budget, and we've been doing one for 11 years now.
And is it monthly? Do you do it every single month?
Yeah, I try to update it every week or two, and we'll sit down at the beginning of the year or when there's a major life event happening if we need to reevaluate it significantly, do it for the whole year, and then adjust as we need to go along.
What gets measured gets managed type thing.
Exactly. You never run out of money before you run out of month. I know you should get that backwards. You got it written down on paper.
You never run out of the month. Yeah, you'll have money left over at the end of the month.
Yes.
All right. What's the biggest mistake you think people are making by with debt, by keeping debt or paying off debt? What's the biggest mistake you see?
What I've seen, and from people I've counseled as well, is they'll have X number of dollars sitting over here in a savings account earning 0%, and that makes them feel secure just because it's over there. That's there. I can use it if I want it. But then over here on the other side, all right, we're carrying 10% on a credit card, or 18% or 22%, or we've got a car loan where we're paying 6, 7, 8% over here, which is costing us money each month. Take the savings and throw it at the debt, and you'll end up with more in the long run.
So one of the things I had mentioned to one of our former students, that we have a program they just went through, and so I was talking to them. They had a car, and they owed $25,000 on this car, okay? And these guys were savings rock stars, all right? I'm going to use your term there, rock star. They had $40,000 sitting in their savings account. And it was just this accumulation of money over time. And, as we started peeling back some layers, we realized this stemmed back from way, way long ago, years ago. And they needed this feeling of safety, the safety net of savings. So I said, okay, you're sitting here on $40,000 cash and you owe $25,000. The cash is sitting in a savings account making, like you said, 0.03%. They're paying 9% on a loan. Okay, so I said, let me ask you this. Let's say that you had a car without a loan, all right? You had a paid-for car, but you only had 40 minus 25, you had $15,000 in the bank, okay? Would you take a loan against your car for $25,000 to put 40 in the bank? And they're like, no, who would do that? I'm like, that's what you're doing right now.
Exactly. People need to realize when you have a paid-off car, the repo man can't take it. When you have a paid off house, the imperial federal government can't take it. When all these items are paid for, no one can take it from you. And that is where the security is. No one can take my house. No one's going to ever come and take my car. If I've got a 6-month emergency fund and something really bad happens, I'm okay for 6 months while I'm out there looking for work or whatever, or I need to move or something. I need to sell the house. That's security in those things.
And you live it, because I'm just going to ask you right now, do you have a mortgage?
I've not had a mortgage since 2009. 8 years. I've been debt-free.
Okay, so when you say debt-free, you have no credit card debt, you have no student loan debt, you have no car debt, and you have no mortgage.
Correct.
So you don't owe anyone a dime.
I don't owe anyone anything. So I'm except for my property taxes each year.
Absolutely.
That's my big worry.
Okay, so let's rewind then. You said 2009 is when you paid off your house?
Correct.
What is that moment like when you got to think, Scott, most of us across the country right now, we can't even fathom that, right? We're thinking we're just trying to stop living paycheck to paycheck. And I'm listening to this guy, Scott, talk to me about paying off his mortgage. Now, but you didn't start like that. You talked about being a money moron, buying too much house, being in debt, living the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. 2009, what is that moment like when it's over? And what I mean, when you were done, this is the moment it's over. I don't owe anybody a dime for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I've been on the other side, like we said, where everybody's living paycheck to paycheck. And the day came, my wife and I, we lived with our in-laws for a year as we were transitioning from Georgia, where we live now, to Texas. That allowed us to save up a significant amount of money while we had our house built and put a big down payment on it. And we met with our financial advisor after we moved into our house, and we got to talking with him. We're like, we've got enough money in our investments here. We could write a check tomorrow and pay off the balance in this house. And then he looked at us like, yeah, you could do that. Or you could, he kind of wanted to go down the road of you could leave it in their investment because some people do that. But then he's like, no, some people choose to have that security, that debt freedom, that peace of mind, as opposed to, maybe you can earn a little bit more in the stock market over the long term. So we're like, sell the money, sell the stock, sell the investments. We'll write a check. And then when we got the payoff notice or the deed from the mortgage company, it was like, yeah, this is it. Never get no mortgage payment ever again.
Wow. So you guys liquidated some of your investments to pay off the balance.
Yes. And we still would not everything. We still had some investment money left over, but we did sell a chunk of them in order to get to that point. And we were okay with that. And we still are. I mean, if you're talking about 30 or 40 years, yeah, maybe we could end up with more money over 34 years if we had left it in the stock market compared to the 3 or 4% that mortgage rates are going for. But man, you can't put a price tag on that peace of mind.
It's funny, you and I agree on this, and I think this is kind of a totally different way of thinking. I have a friend of mine, he's a financial advisor, and so he is always telling me, Andrea and I, we are aggressively paying down the mortgage. And so he's telling me, Chris, what are you doing? He's like, the markets right now are returning, in the double digits every single month, and you're sitting over here paying 3.5% down when you could be putting money and getting, 14 or 16%, as it was the last couple of months. And I just tell him, I say, you know what? It's peace of mind. It's the opportunity cost. I'm buying, if you will, peace. And what I mean by peace is I still can't picture. I mean, I can picture, but I don't understand what it's going to feel like when Andrea and I pay off that last mortgage payment. And that's why I was asking you, there's not too many people I get to talk to that don't have a mortgage payment. I mean, even people that are, 60, 70 years old, they still have, a 20-year mortgage, which is crazy. And then you're sitting over here. How old were you when you paid off your house?
I was 35, 36, I think.
Wow. I mean, how many 30-year-olds out there right now are living in paid-for houses?
Yeah, probably a really, really tiny percent. And
not enough.
Yeah, you've also got to ask yourself, when you hit retirement's doorstep, at whatever age that happens to be, 50, 65, whatever, ask yourself, do I want to pay it off mortgage when I go into retirement? Well, the answer to a T is everybody says, yeah, absolutely, yes. Okay, well, why not accelerate that by 10, 15, 20, 25 years? Get there sooner. Sure.
So, yeah, if you're really good, pay off your mortgage before you retire. If you're excellent, pay off your mortgage 10 years before you retire. One of those things.
Right.
So what has that allowed you to do with your life since you are completely debt-free? Meaning, you have nothing you owe anybody. Property taxes, we're not getting around that, but you don't owe anybody. You're not paying interest.
No, I'm not. And you gain freedom with that. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, but if I were an employee, I'll give you an example for my wife. She worked for somebody back in Atlanta. They would not transfer her to Texas, where her family's from. She wanted to come back here. And we were in a financial position at that time because we just had her one mortgage. We said, you know what? You go in Monday, you resign, you can finish up your schooling, which she did over a course of the next year. And then we immediately, as soon as she graduated, moved back to Texas. So that's the kind of freedom that we're talking about. It gives you the opportunity to say, see you later, boss. I don't like the way they're treating me, or I want to move on, I want to do something else. I'm out of here. When you don't have debt or when you have very little debt, you can do that.
Yeah, that's impressive. So many people are listening right now. They're either on their way to work or they're on their way home from work, and they're thinking, my boss is a jerk. I am done. And then I have this guy, Scott, telling me that, yeah, you can just go in and say, hey, I'm out. I don't want to be treated this way anymore. Life's too short to put up with this for too long. And so you didn't do the 30-year mortgage, because if you did, you would have had a mortgage at age 5. So you did a little bit different, and hey man, kudos to you. I think that is beyond impressive. That blows my mind. So as far as investing now, how much are you able to invest that you weren't able to invest before?
It's varied because right now I'm quote unquote early retiree. I work because I want to, not because I have to. So right now we've kind of paused our retirements while we're investing back into the business. But I'd say we socked away a lot of money after we paid off the mortgage on our house, and everything went into 401ks and IRAs, whatever we could put into, and then external brokerage accounts as well. And that's given us even more financial freedom as well.
I don't want you to tell me any numbers because that's not what this show's about, but I'm going to say I'm pretty sure I'm talking to the millionaire next door.
Yes, and I've been on another podcast where that was the topic of the show, so it's not any big secret.
Okay, so yeah, if you have a paid-for house and you're 30, at 35 years old, and then 8 years later you're able to save money and invest, you're the millionaire next door. Basically, you're the net worth millionaire next door that drives a Honda Fit.
That is correct. It's 10 years old now, just topped at 111,000 miles. And I like to throw that out there, not to impress anybody, but just to impress upon them. There's nothing special or unique about me. I made stupid mistakes early on. I learned from them. I corrected them, and I went whole hog on the financial program to turn my life around. And that's how I got to where I am. And it's something anybody can do at any age.
Hey, I believe that same thing. Scott, you said you've read over 200 books on your website about personal finance. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
All right. What is your favorite out of all those books?
Number one all time is one called The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley. He was a guy that book was written, I believe, in the mid-90s. He interviewed millionaires from all over the United States. And he went into this idea with when he was going to meet these guys, they're like wanting to eat caviar, drink fine champagne, whatever. And as they started streaming into the room for the interviews, he's like, they're wearing hats and overalls, and they're like looking at the fancy food. It's like, what's this? Where's the cheese and crackers?
Where's the Budweiser?
Yeah, where's the Budweiser? Exactly. Yep. And it gives you a peek into how millionaires really are and how they achieve their wealth and how Hollywood marketing people, executives, Gucci, the Rolex people, they want to have this one idea of, and here's what a millionaire is. And in reality, it's the person next door. They're driving the junker cars. They do a budget. They have modest incomes, and they might have small businesses, and they're normal people.
It's funny. You and I, we might be related, Scott, because everything you keep saying, I'm like, yeah, that's me too. I mean, almost every episode on this podcast, I think I mentioned somewhere the millionaire next door. And then I ask you your favorite book, and it's The Millionaire Next Door. Very cool. All right. So, hey, where can we find more about you? Where can I listen to you on iTunes or podcasts? I want to know, tell me everything where we can find more about you.
Sure. My website is scottallenturner.com. And if your listeners want to visit scottallenturner.com/peach, they can get a free audio version of my best-selling book, 99-Minute Millionaire. It's the simplest and easiest book ever written on getting started in investing.
Hey, that's super cool. Thanks for doing that. I didn't know you were going to put that together, so thank you. So guys, any of the links, anything that we talked about inside the show, I will be putting in the show notes. So if you don't have a pen and paper, you're driving or whatever, don't worry. We'll have that inside the show notes. And Scott, anything else you want to share with us before we head on out?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone listening that take this stuff, rewind it, listen to it a few times. Wealth is a long-term, slow process that anybody can do, but everyone can achieve it over time.
Amen. And for those of you listening at the very end here, go to Scott's podcast, okay? At the very, very beginning, he does this Rockstar intro, and then he screams for like 5 seconds. And it is awesome, okay? You will listen to it over and over and over again. It's one of my favorite intros I've heard in all of podcast world. So check that out, scottallenturner.com. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an honor for me because, like I said, I've been a huge fan of yours. And then to have, somebody that I listen to, look up to, come on my show. I mean, hey, this is a good day for me.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. That was episode 39. So all the show notes, all the links, anything that Scott and I talked about in the episode can be found at moneypeach.com/session 39. That's moneypeach.com/session 39. Special thanks to Steve Stewart, the producer of the show, and Kayla Sloan, my assistant. Without them, none of this would be possible. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, with another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. Take care. Hey there, do you ever feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck? Are you stressed at the end of every month and you're just praying you're going to make it through to next payday? Or are you tired of trying to figure out this whole money thing alone and you just simply want someone to point you in the right direction? Well, it's officially time to forgive yourself for any of the mistakes that you've made in the past, and it's time to learn a proven system that works, and that's Awesome Money Course. So don't forget to check out awesomemoneycourse.com, my #1 online program for taking you from with your money to showing you how to be awesome with your money. And that's awesomemoneycourse.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
Da-ba-doom, boom, da-ba-doom.